I knew the truth the moment I opened the envelope. It was a small thing, yellowed slightly at the edges, sealed with the kind of care that tells you the sender wanted it opened slowly. Intentionally. Like a wound. It had no return address, just my name written in a sharp, slanted hand that didn't belong to anyone I knew. I sat with it for 10 minutes at the kitchen table, my thumb brushing the flap but not breaking it. My wife, Rachel, was upstairs getting ready for work. The kids had just left for school. The house was quiet, too quiet for what I was about to find. I peeled the envelope open. Inside were 5 photographs. And they shattered my world. They were black and white, grainy, like they'd been shot from far away with an old lens. But there was no mistaking the curve of her cheek, the bag slung over her shoulder, the familiar red scarf that I'd bought for her birthday last year. Rachel. My Rachel. Walking into a hotel downtown. Beside her, no, pressed against her, was a man half her age. I didn't recognize him, but I knew the type. Long hair. Wire-rimmed glasses. A tote bag filled with books and something else, youth. Confidence. Arrogance, even. He wasn't just someone she knew. He was her student. I stared at the photos so long I didn't realize Rachel had come downstairs. She stood in the kitchen doorway, adjusting her watch, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. She smiled at me, genuinely, or so it seemed. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. She kissed my forehead lightly. "I'll be home late." "Department meeting." I said nothing. The door shut behind her with a soft click. That was 3 days ago. It hadn't always been like this. In fact, if someone had asked me a year ago to describe my marriage, I would have said we were solid. Stable. Not perfect, but good. Rachel was passionate about her work, literature professor, tenured, respected. I admired her. I still do, in ways I can't quite explain. And she loved her students. I'd tease her about how animated she got when grading essays or quoting poetry at the dinner table. She'd roll her eyes, call me a Philistine, then kiss me goodnight anyway. I supported her. Always had. I was the one who suggested she apply for the summer fellowship in Boston. I was the one who picked up the slack at home, packed lunches, drove the kids to practice, learned how to braid Ellie's hair. And maybe that was the problem. Maybe I made it too easy for her to fall in love with someone else. I found the detective's card the same night I got the photos. It was paper-clipped to the bottom one. A note scribbled on the back. "You deserve to know. J." No explanation. No charge. Just truth, dropped in my lap like an unexploded grenade. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the images burned into my mind like a slideshow on repeat. Rachel's hand on the young man's arm. Her body half turned toward him, her expression soft. Intimate. There was no mistaking it. It wasn't just physical. It wasn't just curiosity. It was something. The next morning, I made 2 decisions. First, I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. Not until I understood the full scope of what I was dealing with. Second, I was going to hire the detective. Officially this time. I still had the card. His name was Lucas Avery. Private investigator. Discreet, it said. Efficient. Former police, now freelance. I called. He answered on the second ring, voice rough, tired. "Mr. Raines?" he asked, like he already knew. "Yeah," I said. "You sent me something. I want more." There was a pause. A flicker of silence that stretched just long enough to feel like a decision. "Meet me tomorrow. 8 a.m. Café Rousseau. Bring cash." He hung up. I didn't tell Rachel where I was going. Said I had an early meeting downtown. She barely looked up from her coffee. At the cafe, Lucas was already there, older, broad-shouldered, face weathered like someone who'd spent a lot of time losing things. He pushed a manila folder across the table without a word. More photos. More angles. And this time, timestamps. Dates. Times. Places. There was a pattern. Every Thursday, after her 3:30 seminar, she walked 2 blocks to the Palmer Hotel. Always with the same young man. Sometimes they stayed an hour. Sometimes 3. Name's Owen, Lucas said. 19. Undergrad. Majoring in English Lit. Bright. Naive. My mouth was dry. And Rachel? Lucas looked me straight in the eye. You know what this is. I didn't answer. Because he was right. And yet, something in me still refused to believe it. Even as the truth sat in front of me, printed in ink and shadow. I slid the folder shut. What now? I asked. Lucas shrugged. That's up to you. I nodded slowly. Then I stood. And walked out into the cold morning light, the weight of it all settling on my shoulders like a coat I never asked to wear. Before Rachel, I never believed in the kind of love that makes you forget yourself. I was practical. Measured. The sort of man who double-checks locks at night and keeps a running grocery list on the fridge. My world was small, by choice. Predictable. I dated a little in my 20s, sure, but I never lost sleep over anyone. Love, I thought, was mostly a trick of the brain, some potent mix of hormones and projection. Chemical. Containable. Then she walked into my bookstore. It was a rainy Tuesday. I remember that because the bell over the door had jammed again, and I was halfway up a ladder fiddling with the mechanism when I heard it creak open. She didn't say a word, just shook out her umbrella and wandered into the fiction section, leaving a trail of water on the wooden floor. She didn't look up at me until she'd picked up a copy of A Room with a View. Then she smiled, absently, like the gesture was more muscle memory than invitation, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Something about that gesture stayed with me. She came back the next week. And the next. Always buying something. Always smiling like she wasn't sure if she should. Eventually, I asked her name. Rachel, she said, and that was it. No flirting. No suggestion. Just the kind of name that sounds like it belongs in the middle of a poem. We were married 2 years later in a tiny courthouse on the edge of town, with just my brother and her department chair as witnesses. She wore a navy blue dress with sleeves that kept falling off her shoulders. I remember thinking how impossible it felt that she'd chosen me. Out of everyone, she picked me. And for a while, it worked. We were happy. Not perfect, not cinematic. But real. She taught full-time at the university. I ran the bookstore, ordered too many rare titles no one bought, stocked chocolates near the register because she liked to snack while she browsed. We moved into a modest craftsman home 5 blocks from campus. Bought a dog. Painted the kitchen together one winter break. She wanted sage green, I voted for bone white. We compromised with both. I watched her grow into herself over those years. More confident, more assertive in staff meetings, more willing to challenge her own boundaries. She published an article that got reprinted in a major journal. The head of her department said she was on track for early promotion. Students adored her. And God, I was proud of her. I didn't realize I was losing her until it was already happening. It started, as these things often do, in the margins. The way she'd go quiet at dinner. How her texts turned clipped. The light in her eyes when she spoke about certain classes, or more specifically, a certain student. Brilliant, she said once. He writes like he's lived 3 lifetimes. Owen. That was the first time I heard the name. Back then, I wasn't suspicious. I was happy for her. Happy she was connecting. Inspired. That's the thing about trust. You don't feel it until it breaks. For months, I blamed myself. Thought maybe I'd grown too complacent, too predictable. I wasn't adventurous like she was. I didn't quote poetry in the middle of conversations or debate Derrida with our dinner guests. I'd fall asleep reading spreadsheets and wake up worrying about sales tax. I never questioned her. Even when she started staying late more often, grading at the office, holding mentorship meetings that ran until 10. Even when she forgot our anniversary. Even when she came home once with a scarf that didn't belong to her, claiming she'd borrowed it from a colleague, though I never saw it again. I didn't question her. Because love, real love, is blind in a specific way. It sees the best version of someone and holds on to it, even as the pieces start to chip. I didn't want to see the cracks. And now, sitting here with that manila folder burned into my memory, I wonder how many times I helped her carry her guilt without knowing it. How many nights she came home smelling like someone else's cologne and I chalked it up to a long day. How many lies I mistook for fatigue. She always kissed me goodnight. Every time. Even last week. Even after the Palmer Hotel. I keep thinking about that moment. The kiss. Not hers, mine. The last time I kissed her without knowing. Without suspecting. I wonder if she felt it. If it tugged at her. If there was guilt behind the softness, or just habit. Or worse, nothing at all. Maybe it was already over in her mind. Maybe I was the only one left holding on to it. That night, I stood in our bedroom doorway and watched her sleep. She looked peaceful, folded into the covers like nothing in the world could touch her. I wanted to scream. To shake her awake and ask her why. Why him? Why now? Why not tell me when she stopped choosing me? But I didn't. I walked to the kitchen. Poured a glass of water. Sat at the table. And cried for the first time in 7 years. Not because I'd lost her. But because I wasn't sure I ever really had her to begin with. The first time I saw them together with my own eyes, I didn't mean to. I wasn't following her. I wasn't playing detective. I was just driving. One of those mindless, restless Saturday afternoons when the house feels too silent and the world too loud. I needed coffee. That was it. Something to fill the ache in my chest with steam and bitterness. The cafe was just off campus. A little hole-in-the-wall place with mismatched chairs and moody jazz playing from a dusty speaker in the corner. Rachel loved it. Said it reminded her of graduate school. Said the espresso was honest. I hadn't been in weeks. Not since the photos. But as I pulled into the lot, I saw her. Through the fogged glass window. She was laughing. Her head tilted back, mouth open just slightly. A laugh I used to know. One that used to be mine. And across from her sat the boy. Owen. He was leaning forward, elbows on the table, his hand casually grazing the back of hers, not holding it, not yet, but almost. Like he was waiting for permission. Like he'd already had it. They were sharing a pastry. 2 forks. 1 plate. I didn't get out of the car. Didn't move. I just sat there and watched, my hands gripping the steering wheel until the leather creaked under my fingers. I felt the air thicken in my lungs, a slow, choking fog of disbelief and knowing. I could have taken a photo. Could have marched in, created a scene, shattered the illusion. But I didn't want to humiliate her. I wanted to understand her. That's what made this harder. Rachel wasn't careless. She wasn't cruel. She was composed, articulate, always precise in the way she spoke, moved, thought. Which meant this wasn't an accident. It wasn't a drunken mistake or a fleeting temptation. It was a choice. She had chosen him. And I needed to know why. That evening, I cooked dinner. Roasted chicken. Garlic bread. Steamed greens the way she liked, still crisp. I set the table. Candles. Napkins. A glass of that dry red she loved but always forgot the name of. When she walked in at 7:13, she blinked like she'd stepped into a memory. "You didn't have to do all this," she said, setting her bag down slowly. "I wanted to," I replied, carefully measuring the calm in my voice. "We haven't eaten together in a while." She paused, then smiled. "It smells incredible." We sat across from each other, clinking forks and glasses, trading the kind of small talk that doesn't mean anything unless you're looking for subtext. Her eyes were tired. I noticed how she blinked more when she lied. I hadn't known that before. Maybe I hadn't wanted to. "How was your day?" I asked, soft, neutral. "Good," she said. Blink. "Busy. Department stuff?" "Mostly," she nodded, dabbing her lips with her napkin. "Some student meetings." I held her gaze a second too long. She didn't flinch. She blinked again. That night, when she was brushing her teeth, I walked past the bathroom and caught her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes found mine, and for a second, I saw it. The guilt. It flickered, quick and sharp like lightning behind clouds. Then it vanished. She smiled, foam at the corners of her mouth, and said, "I was thinking we could go away for a weekend sometime. Just us." I stared at her. "Sure," I said. "That sounds nice." She turned back to the mirror. I kept walking. Sunday morning, I went back to Café Rousseau. Lucas was already waiting, sipping black coffee like it was his religion. "You were right," I told him. He didn't respond, just handed me another folder. Inside were screenshots this time. Messages. Rachel's emails. Her texts. Apparently, Owen wasn't as private as she was. His university email had been compromised in a minor phishing breach last year. Lucas had a guy. Of course he did. Some of it was innocuous. Drafts of essays. Class discussion threads. But some. "You're the only thing that makes Thursdays bearable." If he knew what we talked about in bed, he'd never sleep again. "I'm not ready to leave him." "Not yet. But sometimes I wish you and I could just disappear." I closed the folder. Lucas leaned back, folded his arms. "I can keep going. Dig deeper. You tell me how far you want this to go." I stared out the window, past the glass and condensation, to a world that hadn't changed, though mine had. "No," I said finally. "That's enough." That night, I stood by the window while she slept. Watched the wind brush against the trees, watched the shadows stretch long across the yard. I wasn't sure what was more unbearable, her betrayal or my need to protect her from the consequences of it. What do you do when the person you love is the one tearing you apart? You don't scream. You don't leave. You watch. You wait. You study the ruins. Because if you're going to survive the fire, you first have to feel the heat. The day I almost told her, it rained. Not a quiet drizzle, but a full downpour, the kind that makes you sit in your car a moment longer, just to listen to the weight of it on the windshield. It was Friday. She'd worn that same scarf again, the red one with the fraying edge. I watched her knot it around her neck as she rushed out the front door, phone pressed to her ear, eyes already elsewhere. She didn't kiss me goodbye. Didn't even look back. I stood there in the kitchen, coffee going cold in my hand, and wondered if she would have noticed if I hadn't been there at all. The thought sat with me all morning. That, and the folder tucked beneath my side of the mattress. Lucas had texted me again the day before. "You need to see this. Urgent." I met him after work, same cafe, same seat. He handed me an envelope, thinner this time, but heavier somehow. Inside was a single photograph. It was them. Again. Only this time, it wasn't a hotel. It was our house. Back porch. Early morning light. Rachel standing in her robe, barefoot, leaning close to Owen, her hand on his chest. His head tilted down toward her shoulder, a cigarette burning between his fingers. I recognized the moment. I'd been away that weekend, visiting my brother in Milwaukee. She'd said she was using the time to write, read, recharge. I hadn't questioned it. The timestamp was clear. Sunday, 6:42 a.m. My mouth went dry. She brought him here, I said aloud, to no one. The words didn't feel like mine. Lucas said nothing. He didn't need to. That night, I sat in the living room and watched the second hand crawl around the clock face. Rachel was upstairs grading. Or so she said. She had a new habit now, leaving the door half-closed while she worked, music playing softly, the kind she used to claim made her too emotional to concentrate. A change. Another one. She didn't notice me standing there. I watched her for a while. The way her fingers moved across the trackpad. The way she paused every few minutes to check her phone, smile at something, then shake her head slightly as if telling herself not to. That was the moment I knew I wasn't looking at my wife anymore. I was looking at someone I used to know. The insomnia came next. I'd lie awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, her breath slow beside me. I'd catalog every noise, the creak of the pipes, the sigh of the wind, the faint buzz of her phone screen lighting up at midnight. Sometimes I'd reach for her hand under the covers. Sometimes she'd let me take it. Other nights, she'd pull away without meaning to, turning in her sleep, her back curling toward the wall. I started walking at night. Long loops around the neighborhood. Past the dim porch lights and shut blinds of neighbors who smiled politely in the mornings but never knew what passed behind our own windows. I wondered, sometimes, if they knew. If anyone did. One night, I found myself outside her office building. I parked across the street and watched. 10:30. Lights still on. 11. A shadow moved across the window. 11:15. The front door opened. Rachel. Alone. I felt a strange, undeserved relief, like I'd been hoping to catch her in the act just to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy. But the truth was already known. The proof already filed away in my drawer, in my chest, in the ache behind my eyes. I tried, once, to bring it up gently. We were in the kitchen again. She was slicing apples, humming. I said, "Do you ever think about us? About how we used to be?" She stopped. Knife hovering above the cutting board. "Of course I do," she said carefully. "Why?" I shrugged. "I don't know. You seem distant lately." Her eyes didn't meet mine. "I've just been tired. Work's been intense." "Is it work?" Silence. Then, softly, "What are you asking?" I shook my head. "Nothing." And that was the moment I hated myself the most. Because I had the chance. And I didn't take it. The next morning, she left early. Earlier than usual. I waited exactly 15 minutes, then went upstairs. Opened her drawer. Her journals weren't there anymore. I checked the closet. The space behind the shoeboxes where she used to hide things when the kids were little. Empty. Even the receipts were gone. She was erasing herself, carefully, methodically. Preparing for something. Not just a mistake. A departure. That night, I opened the envelope one last time. Took out the photo of them on the porch. I placed it in a new envelope. Wrote one word on the outside. Why? Then I slid it into her briefcase. No return address. No signature. Just a question I already knew she wouldn't answer. And still, I loved her. God help me, I did. That's the thing no one tells you about betrayal. It doesn't cancel out love. It just poisons it. Slowly. Quietly. Until one day, you're lying next to someone you die for. And realizing they already did. The night it all came apart, it was snowing. Not heavy, the soft kind, like the sky was trying to apologize. It coated the street in quiet and turned every window into a painting. I remember standing at the kitchen sink, watching the flakes spiral under the porch light, thinking, this could be a beginning, or it could be the end. It was Thursday. I knew what Thursdays meant. By now, it was routine. Her seminar let out at 3:30. By 3:45, she'd be at the Palmer Hotel. By 6, she'd be back in our kitchen, shrugging off her coat, saying, God, I need a shower. That class drained me. Except this time, I was already at the hotel. I didn't tell Lucas. Didn't want him there. I didn't want any more photos. I didn't want documentation. I wanted the truth. In person. I parked 2 blocks away and walked the rest. My heart wasn't racing, it was heavy. A slow, sinking stone inside my chest. I didn't even feel cold. I'd called the front desk earlier, claimed I was her assistant, said she'd forgotten her key. Room 306. They didn't question it. I didn't knock. I opened the door. And there she was. Rachel. Not in bed. Not undressed. Just sitting on the edge of the mattress, her fingers tangled in her lap, like she was trying to knot them into something smaller. And beside her, leaning against the dresser, arms folded like a boy waiting outside the principal's office. Owen. His expression shifted the second he saw me. Surprise first. Then shame. Then something harder, like defiance trying to grow inside fear. Rachel didn't move. Hey, I said. Calm. Quiet. Neither of them answered. I stepped inside. Closed the door gently behind me. Don't get up, I added. I won't be long. Owen looked at Rachel, then back at me. Mr. Raines, I didn't. You don't have to explain, I said. I already know. Rachel's voice came out like sand. How long have you known? I looked at her then. Really looked. Not the version I'd been carrying in my memory. Not the woman in the wedding photo on our nightstand. But her. Tired. Beautiful. A little broken. Long enough, I said. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Owen cleared his throat. This isn't what it looks like. I almost laughed. But I didn't. Instead, I reached into my coat and pulled out the envelope. The one with the photo. The one that had started everything. I held it out. Rachel didn't take it. I don't want to see that, she whispered. It's not for you, I replied. I turned and placed it on the nightstand, right next to her phone. Then I stepped back. For a moment, none of us moved. The room was silent except for the muted hum of the heating vent and the faint sounds of life 3 floors below. I'm not here to yell, I said. Or to fight. I'm not here to shame you. Rachel's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She never cried when it counted. I just needed to see it for myself. Owen looked away. Rachel swallowed. Why didn't you say anything? I was afraid, I said honestly. Of me? No. Of what it meant. Of what came after the truth. She looked down at her hands. I didn't mean to. I know. I let that hang. I loved you, I said, more to the air than to her. Then I turned to the boy. And you, whatever you think this is, it's not. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. You think this is passion. Rebellion. Maybe even love. But it's not. It's a hole she's trying to fill. A part of herself she lost and thought she could borrow from you. He looked at the floor. I looked at her one last time. Rachel, I'm done. She didn't speak. Didn't reach for me. She just sat there, letting the words fall over her like ash. I'll have the papers drawn up next week. Then I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. Outside, the snow was still falling. The street was quiet. Clean. Undisturbed. I stood there on the sidewalk, breathing in the cold, the kind that stings your lungs and makes you feel awake for the first time in days. I should have been shaking. But I wasn't. I felt empty. And also, somehow, whole. Because the truth had finally stepped into the light. And it didn't kill me. It just showed me what was left. I didn't go home that night. I drove. No destination, no plan, just streetlights flickering past the windshield, the soft hum of tires against wet asphalt. I didn't even turn on the radio. Silence was the only thing that made sense anymore. Eventually I ended up at the lake, the one we used to take the kids to when they were younger. It was empty now, of course. Snow blanketed the sand, turning it ghost white, hiding every memory beneath its quiet weight. I pulled off the road, shut the engine, and just sat there in the cold, my breath fogging the glass, thinking. What comes after the ending? Not rage. Not relief. Just space. A vast, aching space where something used to be. And in that space, I started to hear myself again. The next few days passed like slow water. Rachel didn't call. She didn't come home. I imagine she stayed with him, at least for a while. Maybe they thought it would be different without the secret, freer, more alive. But they always think that at first. I moved into the guest room. Not because she asked me to, but because the bed still smelled like her shampoo, and the closet still held pieces of the life we built. I couldn't sleep surrounded by ghosts. I told the kids. That was the hardest part. I kept it simple. No bitterness. No details. Your mom and I are separating. My daughter cried. My son didn't. He just looked down at his plate and nodded, like he'd known before I did. Did she cheat on you? He asked, eyes never lifting. I couldn't lie. Yes. He didn't ask who. But I think he already knew. I filed the papers on a Tuesday. The courthouse was mostly empty, save for a woman behind a plexiglass screen who barely looked up as I slid the folder across the counter. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. It felt like filling out a change of address form, ordinary, almost bureaucratic. And maybe that's what endings really are. Not fire. Not fury. Just paperwork. I started running again. A mile at first. Then 2. Then 5. My knees complained, but I kept going. Not because it made me feel better, but because it gave me something to push against. Something that hurt without lying to me. I changed the locks. Donated her coats. Deleted her Spotify playlists from the living room speaker. Each act was small, almost petty. But together, they formed a kind of ritual. A cleansing. It's strange, the things you don't notice until someone leaves. How the air shifts. How light enters a room differently. How quiet the house gets at 6 p.m. But it's in that quiet that I began to reclaim pieces of myself. I started reading again, books I chose, not ones she recommended. I called my brother. Told him everything. We talked until midnight. He didn't try to fix it. Just listened. And that was enough. I cooked dinner. For myself. Slowly. On purpose. Not because anyone was watching. But because I was. One night, weeks later, I got a letter. Handwritten. No return address. The handwriting was familiar. Rachel. Just 3 pages. No excuses. No plea for reconciliation. Just, reflection. She wrote about how lost she'd felt. How the life she built started to feel too small for the person she was becoming. How Owen wasn't about love, but escape. A mirror to a younger self she didn't recognize in our marriage anymore. I never stopped loving you, she wrote. But I started loving you with less of myself. I'm sorry I didn't know how to say that. There were tears on the paper. Smudges where the ink had blurred. I read it once. Then again. Then I folded it carefully, placed it in a drawer, and never opened it again. Because forgiveness doesn't always look like a reunion. Sometimes it looks like closure. The seasons began to shift. The snow melted. The lake thawed. And so did I. Not all at once. Not in some cinematic crescendo. But slowly. Daily. Like the body remembering how to breathe after a long time underwater. One morning, I caught my reflection in the mirror and didn't look away. I shaved. Bought a new coat. Went to a bookstore, not mine, just one downtown. I browsed without thinking about her. That was the first time I realized she wasn't in the room with me anymore. Not even in my head. People say betrayal is like a knife. They're wrong. It's more like a fog. It creeps. It lingers. It changes the shape of things you thought you knew. But eventually, the fog lifts. And what you find, if you're lucky, is not just the wreckage of what was, but the outline of who you could become.